Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to really unpack the insights from a huge pile of research, interviews, you name it, all focused on giving you the intelligence you need to lead effectively. And today, we're tackling something pretty massive, the future of commercial leadership itself. It's undergoing a real transformation. If you step back and look at the commercial landscape today, our sources are really clear on this, the traditional model. It's hitting a breaking point. Seriously. The customer journey isn't this neat straight line anymore. It's messy, it's complex, fragmented. And worse, so many companies still operate with these rigid silos, right? Marketing, sales, customer success, they often work almost in isolation, sometimes literally just throwing leads or customers over the wall to the next team. And when these, absolutely critical functions are cut off from each other, it just creates friction and, frankly, distrust. Pretty much every single point the customer interacts with you.
And that friction, that's the real enemy of growth here. It's systemic. It's precisely why the role of the chief revenue officer, the CRO, is having to fundamentally change right now. We're seeing this mandatory evolution away from the old school CRO, who was mostly a controller, focused heavily on pipeline volume, towards someone much more sophisticated, an orchestrator, someone who actually conducts the entire revenue ecosystem because it is all interconnected. Yeah, this idea of orchestration, that's really the core theme for our deep dive today. It means the continuous dynamic syncing up of three fundamental pillars. They really depend on each other.
I really like that framing, people, intelligence, and purpose. It feels so much more, foundational than just chasing the next quarter's number. It implies real design thinking, not just delivery. So today, let's really dive deep into this shift, unpack what it actually means to go from being a controller to a conductor. And maybe start with the philosophical change, the architectural shift that's needed in leadership today. Okay, let's ground this in the day-to-day. Why are those old silos, marketing gets the lead, sales closes them, CS handles them after. Why are they actually hurting businesses now? What's really changed?
Well, fundamentally, systemic complexity has changed everything. It really has.
Right.
We're generally not selling simple one-off widgets anymore, right? We're selling complex solutions, often subscriptions that need ongoing service adaptation. So the customer journey naturally becomes nonlinear. It demands seamless engagement from multiple teams, sometimes all at once. When marketing just, checks out the moment a contract is signed, or sales doesn't pass on the full story, the why behind the deal, to customer success, the experience just breaks instantly, and the customer feels that internal misalignment very, very acutely. So the CRO's mission, it has to shift. It's got to be about driving cohesion across all the activities that generate and retain revenue. We're already seeing the leading edge, the high-growth companies moving away from these isolated teams. They're adopting integrated sales pods. And these pods, they're multidisciplinary. They literally weave together marketing specialists, sales talent, CS reps, often aligned to specific regions or industries. This kind of integration makes sure the company shows up as one unified, consistent, informed entity to the customer. Always. And it drastically cuts down those painful internal handoffs.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a total rethink of how we even measure success in these roles. If the focus is now cohesion, then those old metrics, they've got to be on the way out, surely.
Oh, absolutely. The orchestrator, they're just not measured solely by what individual teams pump out anymore. We have to move past counting cold calls or the raw number of MQLs, or even just the top-line revenue figure in isolation. The real value, the core value, it shifts to optimizing those critical transitions, those interactions between the departments. Think about the orchestra metaphor again. If the percussion and the strings are playing at totally different speeds, the audience hears the clash, right? Even if each section is brilliant on its own. So the central measure of success becomes the quality of those organizational handoffs. How quickly, how accurately does the context, the customer story, pass from one team to the next? Like how fast and, crucially, how accurately does the context move from that sale of contract over to the team that actually has to implement it? Optimizing those points of friction, that becomes the highest leverage thing a revenue leader can do.
That completely reframes the CRO's job then. They're not just managing people anymore. They're managing the systems that connect the people. It makes the CRO sound, less like a traditional sales boss and much more like an architect. Yeah, an architect. And if the quality of the handoff is the new key metric, then investing in the architecture itself has to be paramount. We're talking shared tech stacks, common definitions for things like lifetime value, getting everyone on the same page, and building collaborative infrastructure. Our sources point to something really interesting here, too. The rise of what they call micro CROs in very specialized fields, like, say, regulated research. These leaders focus almost entirely on designing that essential quality infrastructure and strategic high-value partnerships. They keep the internal overhead light, but maximize the systemic design. That focus on architecture, on building the internal rails for quality delivery, that seems to be the new standard for top-tier revenue leadership.
But this shift, it also puts an incredible human strain on leaders. We've pushed organizations towards lean governance, right, for efficiency. But an unintended consequence is this heavier cognitive burden on executives. Leaders are now expected to oversee integration across all these diverse, complex functions. And that leads to just relentless context switching. It really strains their mental resources. And that cognitive drag, it pulls the leader away from the deep strategic thinking that orchestration actually demands.
Wow. So we've built organizations that look streamlined on paper, but might actually be burning out the very leaders we need for the strategic vision. I think probably everyone listening can relate to that feeling of drowning in notifications, back-to-back meetings. Our sources suggest this cognitive drag isn't just a personal problem, it's an architectural one. And it needs a technical solution, which is where AI starts to come in, acting as a kind of leadership assistant. Yeah, these generative models, they offer immediate, pretty powerful relief. They can optimize those time-hindering activities. Imagine AI taking, long, rambling meeting discussions and just instantly summarizing the key decisions, the action items, the relevant context automatically. The critical point here isn't about cutting costs, though. It's about preserving leadership capacity. By offloading that operational friction, the orchestrator gets freed up. They can shift focus from constant operational firefighting back to their core strategic job, building those human connections and designing the organization's systemic architecture.
Exactly. And that newly freed up capacity then needs to navigate this paradox between intuition and data. Look, data-driven leadership is crucial. You need it to spot patterns, measure results, no question. Yet, our sources really caution against relying only on the numbers. There's a real danger of getting, buried in the data. That can undermine strategic vision because data mostly reflects the past. It can lead to short-sighted decisions that completely miss big market shifts happening right now. This is where a seasoned leader's intuition becomes absolutely essential. It acts as that strategic filter, the integrator. Data gives the leadership team the what, right? The facts, the metrics, past performance. But intuition often provides the critical insight into the why. The underlying context, the emotional drivers of why buyers behave the way they do, the unmet needs that aren't even quantified yet. Integrating these allows for those strategic leaps that the raw data hasn't fully caught up to. Of course, leaders have to actively manage their own biases, like confirmation bias. You have to consciously challenge your intuition with rigorous logic and data. The aim is augmentation. Data informs your wisdom, and your wisdom challenges the assumptions baked into the data.
And that point about critical human insight brings us right back to the value of people. It's irreplaceable, isn't it? Automation just hits a wall here. It fundamentally can't capture the emotional context, the messy human feelings that really drive high-stakes business decisions. It might detect frustration in a chat, sure, but it can't necessarily soothe it authentically, not in the same way a person can. So the future commercial model, it's undeniably hybrid. It has to be. We see AI excelling at orchestration, execution, fetching data, analyzing trends, handling repetitive tasks incredibly fast and at scale. But human professionals, they're indispensable for strategy, creativity, building real relationships, and crucially, ethical oversight. Our research consistently shows that when companies successfully blend AI analytics with human empathy, they just consistently outperform those leaning too heavily on one or the other. The best human seller becomes this kind of sales superhero, right? Empowered by AI as the ultimate wingman, amplifying the human touch, not trying to replace it.
Okay, so let's pivot now to intelligence. This is really the architectural foundation for foresight in the organization. In this orchestration era, your go-to-market strategy, your GTM, it just can't be static. It absolutely has to function like a continuous learning system. The high-growth companies, they're designing their GTM to integrate these fast, regular feedback loops.
Yeah.
That's how they stay constantly synchronized with what the market actually needs right now.
And this loops right back to trust, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That trust imperative. Because if you as a company collect tons of customer data, but then you fail to act on it, if you don't adapt your strategy, evolve your service model based on what you're learning, well, it sends a really loud signal that you're not actually listening. And that failure to adapt quickly, it just eats away at customer loyalty. So GTM adaptability isn't just about being efficient. It's actually a prerequisite for earning and keeping customer trust.
Exactly. And that dynamic GTM strategy is designed specifically to tackle that persistent alignment gap, the disconnect between sales, marketing, and often product development. In complex markets today, you have to continuously adjust your outreach based on real-time buyer insights. What's working, what's not. We're seeing this necessary blend of account-based marketing, ABM, with account-based experience, ABX. You could think of ABM as shifting from, say, casting a wide net to targeting the big schools of fish. ABX is like moving to a highly focused handline strategy for the biggest fish, making sure their specific personalized experience is absolutely perfect. And critically, this requires the service delivery teams, the operations side, to be able to scale and adjust their capacity based on the signals coming from that GTM system. You can't have delivery getting blindsided by a sudden sales win.
And the single absolute technical requirement underpinning all of this adaptability, it has to be the centralized customer view. Our research really hammers this home. Historically, having inconsistent customer data spread across different systems for prospects versus existing clients, it leads to these debilitating organizational data silos. And these silos, they're more than just a tech headache. They're real organizational friction points. They physically manifest cultural misalignment. And they waste incredible amounts of employee time. People manually trying to reconcile spreadsheets, logging into multiple systems, instead of selling or serving customers. The orchestrator just has to mandate a single system, one that delivers a complete unified view of the customer, what people often call the single version of the truth. This technical unification, it's not a nice to have. It's absolutely mandatory if you want to scale empathy and intelligent responsiveness across every single customer touchpoint. It ensures that every person the customer interacts with has the full context they need to move that relationship forward confidently. Hashtag 2.2. The synchronized rhythm of quote to cash, QTC. Okay, next up, the operational engine that actually turns that commercial intent into recognized revenue. The quote-to-cash process, or QTC. When we look at the really successful commercial orgs, they don't just see QTC as like a transactional pipeline. They define it as a trust mechanism.
That's a great way to put it. It's like the rhythm section of the orchestra, keeping everything tight. When QTC is meticulously orchestrated, ideally automated, it ensures every single customer interaction within that process, from generating the initial quote through contracting to the final payment and checking entitlements, is organized, convenient, and importantly, error-free. The customer gets faster responses, contracts are clear and transparent, invoices are accurate. Think of QTC like a finely tuned Swiss watch. It's not just about telling time, getting the deal done. It's about having every internal gear, sales, finance, legal, moving in perfect sync so the customer never hears a single distracting click of internal friction. And you can measure this internal harmony directly through QTC velocity metrics, things like time to quote or time to fulfillment. This speed, this velocity acts as a systemic proxy for how well those functions are working together. Slow QTC, that's a clear signal of internal friction, misalignment between sales, finance, legal. Often you see complex deals fall apart right at the contracting stage because of it. Conversely, unified, smooth QTC systems minimize that friction. And that means the speed and accuracy of execution translate directly into better customer satisfaction and, crucially for the business, faster cash flow.
And particularly in today's world, with subscriptions and usage-based models being so common, QTC also becomes this critical financial governance tool. It needs intelligent features built in. Sales teams need the flexibility to offer dynamic pricing, maybe some discounts, but the system has to have guardrails. It needs to protect deal profitability. So we're talking about things like margin-protected discounting rules and streamlined, compliant approval workflows baked right in.
Exactly right. The orchestrator has this delicate balancing act. They need to support the commercial team's need for agility, getting that quick, accurate quote out the door, while also satisfying finance's non-negotiable need for financial fidelity and compliance. QTC solutions now must be able to handle really complex pricing models efficiently, usage tiers, bundled services, maybe multi-year ramps. And by embedding AI-powered analysis directly into the QTC workflow, the system can give dynamic profitability assessments right there during the quoting stage. So the salesperson sees the financial impact of a proposed discount instantly. It ensures growth isn't just fast, but it's fundamentally financially sound growth.
And that responsibility, it doesn't stop when the deal closes, does it? It flows right into post-sale accountability. The QTC architecture has to track the entire subscription lifecycle, renewals, changes, upgrades, even cancellations, and provide complete financial transparency through a unified bill. No surprises. This precise orchestration of entitlement, what the customer actually bought, and fulfillment is so critical for companies with complex monetization. If tracking is inaccurate, you can have significant revenue leakage over time, just money slipping through the cracks. The orchestrator's job includes plugging those leaks through architectural integrity, hashtag 2.3, integrated business planning, IBP, and fulfillment alignment.
Okay, so moving to the highest level of foresight. This takes us beyond just sales forecasting into something called integrated business planning, or IBP. And this distinction is really critical. Traditional forecasting, it's usually pretty narrow. It aims mostly to predict future revenue numbers. IBP, on the other hand, is a strategic, much more holistic shift. It unifies sales, marketing, finance, and the supply chain or operations teams. The goal is to align all business operations with overarching goals, things like sales and operations planning, S&OP, demand forecasting, inventory management, capacity planning.
And IBP directly addresses what our sources are calling the trust gap, which is that potentially dangerous gap between what sales promises and what the organization can actually deliver, the operational capacity for fulfillment. This is really where customer trust gets either cemented or just completely shattered, right? An aggressive sales forecast, or maybe just an inaccurate one that doesn't properly factor in, say, supply chain lead times or the availability of installation crews, it directly leads to fulfillment gaps, delays, broken promises.
That's exactly why the strategic mandate has to shift. We need to move away from measuring just forecast accuracy, did sales predict the right number, towards measuring fulfillment alignment, which asks, was the organizational delivery capability actually synchronized with what sales promised the customer? IBP demands a unified, authoritative view of where the company is heading. It requires shared data ownership, collaborative planning processes, often using advanced analytics to maintain that single source of truth across the whole enterprise.
The goal is to ensure sales never gets too far ahead of supply, and supply never overinvests based on, well, fictional demand signals.
Now, this heavy reliance on advanced analytics, predictive modeling for everything from deal scoring and churn prediction to capacity modeling it, brings us right back to intelligence integrity.
Right.
We absolutely cannot allow these powerful predictive models to just operate as impenetrable black boxes. If trust is truly our commercial foundation, then we have to be able to audit, test, and reproduce the models consistently. The orchestrator has to demand that visibility. Precisely. And to guarantee that integrity, to mitigate the algorithmic risk, our sources are really insisting on the need for a rigorous testing protocol, something like the hierarchical testing framework, the HTF, which comes from fields demanding extreme reliability, like aerospace or complex financial modeling. You can think of HTF as being like air traffic control for your data models. It's a system of checks. This kind of protocol standardizes testing at multiple levels. Level 1 might test the raw data inputs for quality and cleanliness. Level 2 tests the core logic of the algorithm itself. And Level 3 tests the model's output against historical reality and, importantly, against business intuition. Does this result actually make sense? The orchestrator must insist on this kind of protocol to ensure the models are reproducible, reliable. It transforms model integrity from a technical concern into a fundamental commercial foundation the entire business can build on.
All right, let's move to the final pillar, and maybe the most complex one, purpose. Our sources argue pretty compellingly that purpose, really anchored by transparency, isn't just some philosophical nice-to-have. It's actually an architectural requirement for a modern, sustainable revenue system. In this predictive economy we're entering, radical transparency. It stops being just a regulatory headache and becomes a powerful competitive strategy. Being radically honest in your operations about your products, your pricing it offers a clear market advantage that's actually quite hard for competitors to just copy.
And the long-term impact. It's profoundly quantifiable. It's not just soft stuff. Brands that really commit to transparent practices, meaning they're open about, say, where their products come from, how their prices are set, maybe how they handle customer data they experience, up to 25% higher customer loyalty. That doesn't just feel good. Our sources estimate it translates to roughly a 15% increase in revenue over a 3-year period. Because when customers understand your values, your processes, they don't just buy from you, they become passionate advocates. They effectively lower your customer acquisition costs.
But this transparency imperative slams right into a huge challenge, doesn't it? On one hand, the modern organization needs massive amounts of customer data to do personalization effectively. But on the other hand, we're seeing this huge and understandable rise in consumer concerns about privacy. It creates this significant trust deficit.
Absolutely. And if you look globally, consumers consistently rank data transparency as the single most important factor for trusting organizations with their personal information. If you're secretive about how you use their data, guess what? You get less data or lower quality data. Therefore, transparency actually serves as the essential currency for doing personalization effectively at scale. By clearly simply explaining how data is collected, how it's modeled, and how it's used to improve their experience, the CRO builds the trust infrastructure. That trust encourages consumers to share the very information needed for effective hyper-personalization, which ultimately boosts conversion rates and overall sales effectiveness. It's a virtuous cycle built on honesty. Hashtag 3.2. Scaling empathy and the connection index.
Today's customers, they don't just want efficiency. They demand emotional connection. They want to feel understood. This means orchestrators have to figure out how to scale empathy, which sounds like a contradiction, but it involves blending things like sentiment analysis with hyper-personalization and deploying AI in ways that allow interactions to be timely, empathetic, and feel uniquely human-aligned, even if technology is involved.
Yeah, this is what we're calling predictive empathy in action. Using advanced analytics, organizations can actually start to anticipate customer issues before they escalate. By noticing subtle patterns, maybe dips in product usage, lower engagement rates, or even subtle changes in the sentiment detected in chat interactions. This shift from purely reactive support to proactive support. Some models show it can lead to up to a 30% reduction in customer complaints. It's tangible proof that the system itself has empathy baked in. Think about an AI agent, not just processing a transaction, but maybe detecting those subtle digital cues of frustration in a chat. And then instead of just continuing robotically, it triggers a seamless, warm handoff to a human agent right at the moment that emotional intervention is most needed. That demonstrates the organization cares about the customer's emotional state even before they have to explicitly complain.
But the traditional metrics we rely on, cost per contact, average handle time, they're completely blind to this crucial human connection, the thing that actually fuels long-term loyalty. So how do we actually quantify the quality of that empathetic interaction? It feels fuzzy.
That is the core tension, isn't it? Leaders often risk optimizing for the transactional numbers game while completely missing, or even damaging, the essential human element that builds real brand equity. We absolutely need a more rigorous metric than just a simple CSAT score after an interaction. While something like a customer service empathy score may be aiming for consistently above 80% can start to gauge the organization's ability to connect emotionally, we really need to champion something much more comprehensive. Let's call it the connection index. The connection index would be a composite KPI, a blend. It measures not just if the issue was resolved or how fast, but did the customer feel understood and respected during the process. This requires blending hard data with softer signals. You'd look at emotional sentiment derived from real-time AI analysis of call transcripts or chat logs, combine that with detailed post-interaction surveys asking about feeling heard. And crucially, you also have to factor in employee feedback regarding their own level of empowerment. Do they feel they have the freedom and resources to treat the customer with dignity? Because if employees feel constrained or micromanaged, that will inevitably show up in the customer interaction. Measuring empathy and empowerment with this kind of rigor, it fundamentally redefines how modern leaders compete and grow. It proves that purpose, that human connection, is actually profitable.
Now, as the orchestrator deploys AI more broadly across this whole revenue ecosystem, they absolutely have to take on the role of steward, the steward of responsible AI. Governance here isn't optional. It's mandatory infrastructure. You need frameworks that set out clear ethical guidelines, upholding fairness, transparency, accountability, and proactively working to mitigate the biases that we know are inherent in large data sets. Ignoring this, it's basically inviting catastrophic commercial and reputational damage down the line.
And that governance needs more than just technical rules on paper. It requires deep cultural embedding and operational training. Leaders have to instruct all employees on AI's ethical boundaries, its legal limitations. We need to ensure teams avoid just blindly trusting AI outputs. If the AI flags a deal as high risk, the human needs to understand why. They need to investigate, to apply judgment, not just accept the algorithm's verdict as gospel. The priority has to be continuous monitoring, making sure the AI systems stay aligned with the overarching strategic purpose, which should be sustainable, ethical growth, and aren't just optimizing for, say, short-term activity volume, which could easily lead to harmful unintended consequences.
And finally, we have to make sure our compensation structures actually align with this more sophisticated purpose. Traditional comp plans, they mostly reward volume, how many deals close, how quickly they closed. Orchestration demands linking rewards to more complex, intentional outcomes. Things like maintaining high customer retention rates over the long term or achieving consistently high scores on that new connection index we just talked about. We fundamentally need to reward the quality of growth, not just the sheer quantity.
Yes, and this is a really important caution from our sources. We have to stress the need for absolute metric integrity here. If you start linking compensation directly to potentially subjective metrics like perceived empathy, you can run into trouble. You risk unintended consequences, like incentivizing manipulative behaviors just to goose the score, or accidentally creating disparate compensation outcomes across the sales force. based on potentially biased assessments of soft skills. So the orchestrator has to design really sophisticated, multifaceted compensation structures, ones that reward the desired behaviors using objective, robust metrics that are hard to game. This means ensuring those scores on the connection index, for example, are derived from statistically reliable, audited data points. That provides the long-term integrity needed for the compensation system to be seen as fair and effective. So, looking ahead the next decade, commercial performance is really going to be defined by augmentation, not replacement augmentation, giving human genius, human connection, a massive digital amplifier. AI functions best as that wingman, enabling human sellers to be more personal, more attentive, more emotionally attuned to buyers, and to do it at scale because the AI handles the administrative drudgery.
Yeah, and our sources highlight a really critical value gap here. It speaks directly to why authentic human oversight is so key. There's research into digital commerce showing that AI-powered digital avatars, trying to sell things in e-commerce, they significantly underperform compared to actual human live streamers. Why? Well, they lack behavioral realism. They feel fake. The market consistently rewards authenticity, real connection. So the smart investment isn't necessarily an AI that tries to mimic connection and inevitably falls short. It's an AI that enables superior human interaction. Things like providing real-time coaching during a sales call, analyzing buyer sentiment to guide the conversation, or even mirroring communication styles to build rapport faster.
Exactly. And to really thrive in this hybrid environment, future commercial leaders absolutely must cultivate three core attributes. These are the new essential competencies. First is adaptability, just that continuous ability to modify processes, embrace new tools quickly, and shift strategies based on that real-time feedback loop we talked about. Second, empathy. And not just feeling empathy, but the skill to use data insights not just to segment customers mechanically, but to truly personalize interactions authentically, to build genuine rapport. And third, data literacy. That baseline competence to interpret, question, and leverage AI-generated insights for smarter, evidence-based decision-making, but critically, without becoming a slave to the algorithm.
And crucially, human oversight. It remains completely non-negotiable. This is the curation role we mentioned. AI output should never ever be treated as final, infallible answers. They're raw intelligence. They require human validation, human curation, human contextual refinement. Like a human needing to flag specific nuances about a long-standing customer relationship that the model, lacking history, completely missed. This practice is absolutely essential, especially for high-stakes decisions or direct customer communications. It ensures the organization avoids spitting out generic, disconnected, or potentially biased automated responses that can instantly destroy all the trust that orchestration has worked so hard to build. Hashtag 4.2. Organizational rhythms and the leadership reflection.
And remember, orchestration requires intentional cultural habits. The best technology in the world can't sustain efficient QTC or successful IBP on its own. The synchronicity you build into the systems, it has to be constantly reinforced by predictable cultural rituals and rhythms. Our sources show these rhythms can significantly boost team productivity, cross-functional trust, and just overall energy. These are the daily, weekly practices that actually sustain the architectural integrity you've built.
So the orchestrator needs to intentionally create what you might call a revenue rhythm, something that supports that cross-functional harmony. This involves embedding three essential types of rituals that build that muscle memory for collaboration across teams. First, clarity rituals. These are focused on constantly aligning everyone on purpose and strategy. Think regular cross-functional IBP review sessions, for example. Second, connection rituals. These are designed to foster bonds and a shared sense of identity across those old silo lines. Maybe cross-functional recognition programs or shared learning sessions. And third, celebration rituals. Actively recognizing collective achievements, not just individual wins, like celebrating the successful, smooth completion of a really complex QTC process for a major new client, involving sales, legal, finance, and ops. These rhythms, they keep the unified teams culturally synchronized and motivated. It's about the long haul.
And finally, to sustain the personal rigor required for orchestration to make sure the leader doesn't just slowly drift back into the old control mindset they need, structured personal discipline. The leadership reflection canvas that emerged from the research is essentially a structured method for self-assessment. It helps the leader integrate those three pillars, people, intelligence, purpose, into a regular personal review. It might include prompts like, under strengths and resonance, people. Reflecting on your personal leadership strengths versus what the organization needs right now. Maybe asking yourself, Okay, honestly, have I spent enough time this week really engaging with the frontline teams, understanding their reality? Or has my own cognitive burden kept me too isolated in strategic meetings? Under system health intelligence, reviewing those key system KPIs like IBP alignment scores, QTC velocity, assessing the integrity of the data streams, and consciously reflecting on that balance between data and strategic intuition, for example. Which major decision last quarter did I let the data completely overscan my gut instinct, and looking back, was that the right call? Or how many times this week did my teams report having to manually bridge data silos to get their job done? And under ethical impact purpose, assessing how effective those trust metrics like the connection index really are, and proactively identifying and addressing any strategic burning issues related to fairness, transparency, or ethical AI use, like asking, do I have concrete evidence that our current compensation plan is actually rewarding sustainable ethical behavior, or is it still inadvertently just incentivizing frantic activity volume? Hashtag tag outro.
So this journey from controller to orchestrator, it's clearly a profound architectural transformation, and it has to be guided by real conviction. The future CRO needs to be a designer, a governor, and a conductor of this incredibly complex revenue ecosystem, seamlessly weaving together people, intelligence, and purpose. The ultimate competitive advantage, it seems, in the next decade won't just be speed, but accelerated, authentic adaptation. That ability to simultaneously pivot your GTM, synchronize your QTC, align fulfillment perfectly, all guided by that unwavering, uncompromised sense of purpose.
Yeah, the leadership ethos that comes through is so clear. You have to be absolutely stubborn on that vision of ethical, sustainable growth. But you need to be entirely flexible on the operational details of how technology and humans work together to achieve that vision. As one of the sources aptly put it, wisdom requires a flexible mind.
Before we wrap up, we wanted to leave you with 3 specific reflective prompts, tailored just for you, based on everything we've unpacked in this deep dive. First, audit your architecture. Take a hard look at your quote-to-cash system. Is it designed primarily as just an engine of internal efficiency, or is it truly built as a proactive engine of customer trust? Where, specifically, does operational friction break transparency in your contracting or billing process right now? And can you quantify, even roughly, what that might be costing you in loyalty or lost deals? Second, challenger bias. Think back to a recent significant strategic decision you were involved in. Honestly reflect. Did you lean almost exclusively on the data presented? Or did you actively challenge your own gut instinct with evidence, using reason to test its validity? And just as importantly, did you use your intuition to question the assumptions behind the data? And third, measure connection. Imagine if that connection index, the one measuring whether customers feel heard, understood, and respected, imagine if that became a primary compensation metric for your leadership team tomorrow.
What structural changes, what process changes, what empowerment changes would you need to make, starting right now, to enable your employees to consistently deliver those kinds of dignified customer experiences?
Ultimately, the path forward really demands that conviction. The conviction to harmonize people, intelligence, and purpose. It's not just about having the smartest people or the fanciest technology. It's about having the systemic leadership capacity, the architectural foresight to actually bring it all together and ensure you get it right consistently across all 3 of those vital pillars.